They called him the Leper King. But before the world saw his disease, they saw his crown. The year was 1174. The city of Jerusalem shimmered in the heat, its golden walls gleaming like fire under the sun. The Crusaders ruled here, a fragile kingdom surrounded by enemies, surviving on faith and fear. And on that throne sat a boy no older than 13. His name was Baldwin. He was born into war and prophecy. His father, King Amalric, was a warrior. His mother, Agnes, a woman of rare beauty and scandal. From the moment Baldwin was born, the priests whispered that he would be a child of sorrow. But no one could imagine how true that prophecy would become. As a child, Baldwin was bright, curious, and fearless. He rode horses faster than his tutors liked and climbed towers just to see the view. But there was something unusual about him. When other children fell and scraped their knees, they screamed in pain. Baldwin didn't. He felt nothing. At first, his tutors thought it was courage. They called him the fearless prince. But one afternoon when he was 9, his nurse noticed that the skin on his arm was pale and numb, and when she pricked it with a needle, he didn't even flinch. The blood ran freely, but the boy only laughed. It was not bravery. It was leprosy. In that moment, fate sealed its cruel bargain. The boy who would wear the crown of Jerusalem would also wear a mask of decay. The royal physicians were summoned. They whispered in Latin and French, arguing whether it was truly the disease of the outcasts, the same sickness that forced men into caves outside the city walls. But as the weeks passed, the numbness spread. Baldwin's fingers stiffened. His face began to change. And yet he never stopped studying. He devoured books on strategy and history. He trained his mind as his body betrayed him. His father died suddenly when Baldwin was 13, and the crown passed to the boy whose hands could barely feel its weight. When he was crowned Baldwin IV, the nobles of Jerusalem whispered behind their veils, "The kingdom is dying, and now the king is too." But the boy refused to die quietly. He surrounded himself with the finest minds, knights, monks, and scholars. He learned to wield a sword even as his grip weakened. He rode into parades, his body wrapped in silk to hide the sores beneath. To his people he looked fragile, to his enemies he looked immortal. When Saladin, the great Muslim general, rose in Egypt and declared jihad against the Crusader states, everyone expected Baldwin to retreat, to hide in his palace, too weak to fight. But the boy who felt no pain rode at the head of his army. In the dust and blood of the desert, the Leper King met the Lion of Islam. At Montcassard in 1177, the two armies clashed. Saladin outnumbered Baldwin's forces 5-1. The heat was merciless, the ground trembling under thousands of hooves. Baldwin was so weak he had to be tied to his horse, his face wrapped in white linen like a ghost. But when the battle began, the boy lifted the relic of the true cross high into the sun and shouted for his men to charge. What followed was chaos, the kind that only happens once in 1,000 years. The knights of Jerusalem tore through Saladin's army like a storm of steel. When it was over, the desert was littered with banners and bones. Against all reason, the boy king had won. For a brief moment, it felt as if heaven itself had intervened. The people of Jerusalem hailed him as God's chosen. The sick boy who could not feel his own skin had saved the kingdom of Christ. But every victory came at a cost. Baldwin's body was falling apart. His hands were curling inward. His vision dimmed. His face had to be covered in veils when he appeared in public. Yet his mind, sharp, relentless, refused to surrender. He negotiated with kings, outwitted generals, and ruled his kingdom from the shadows of his disease. He was not just a ruler. He was defiance made flesh. The victory at Montcassard made Baldwin IV a legend. But legends, like candles, burn fastest when the wax is thin. The disease had begun to consume him. His fingers curled like claws. His legs trembled under his own weight. Some nights, he would sit alone in the dark halls of Jerusalem's palace, staring at the golden crosses on the walls, whispering prayers that no one ever heard. He was 17. His court tried to hide the truth. Servants carried him through corridors wrapped in silk, his face veiled beneath gold cloth. When he appeared in public, trumpets sounded to drown out the coughs. The people cheered their king, not knowing he could no longer feel their touch. And yet, his mind was sharper than ever. He studied his enemies more than himself. He knew Saladin was gathering strength again in the south, a storm that would not forget the shame of Montcassard. The Leper King could no longer lift a sword, but he could still command armies with his voice. He began to dream of peace, not out of weakness but wisdom. He sent letters to Saladin, offering treaties and truces, but both men understood that peace never lasts in a land built on holy blood. In the secret chambers of the palace, Baldwin faced a new war, one not fought with armies but with family. His sister Sibylla had married a man named Guy de Lusignan, a proud and foolish knight whose ambition was larger than his loyalty. Baldwin saw danger in him. He feared that after his death, Guy would lead the kingdom into ruin. The boy king who could barely hold a quill took it upon himself to decide the fate of a crown. He called a council of nobles and declared that his sister's husband would never rule Jerusalem. Then he named a child, his nephew, as his heir, a baby who could barely walk but whose tiny breath was the kingdom's last hope. Each decree came with agony. His body was failing but his will was unbreakable. In 1183, when Saladin invaded again, Baldwin refused to stay behind. The doctors warned him his flesh was cracking open, that infection would kill him on the road. He ignored them. He was carried on a litter, wrapped in white robes, too weak to sit up, too proud to die in bed. His knights marched silently beside him, their king pale as death but still commanding their hearts. When they reached the enemy, Baldwin could no longer speak above a whisper. He raised his trembling hand, one final gesture of defiance, and his army surged forward. The battle raged across the desert like fire through dry grass. Saladin's men were relentless, but the sight of their dying king leading them filled the crusaders with madness. Once again they pushed Saladin back. Once again the impossible had happened. But triumph no longer meant life. Baldwin returned to Jerusalem victorious, and half dead. The disease had reached his face completely. He could no longer see clearly. His voice faded. His flesh was so numb that the crown had to be tied to his head during ceremonies so it wouldn't fall. His courtiers began to avoid him. They called him the walking tomb. Still Baldwin ruled. He appointed regents, signed treaties and sent envoys. He spent his last months planning how to save his people after he was gone. He wrote in his journal that God had given him two gifts, pain and purpose, and he would not waste either. When his body could bear no more, he called for his sister. He gave her one final command: protect Jerusalem. Do not let the cross fall. Then he ordered the monks to sing as he was carried into the church of the Holy Sepulchre, the place where Christ was said to have risen. The smell of incense filled the air as he asked to be left alone. They found him hours later, sitting upright, his face veiled, the crown still bound to his head, as if time itself had finally taken pity on him. He was 24 years old. The people wept for the king who had ruled while dying. After his death, his warnings came true. The nobles quarreled. Guy de Lusignan took power. And within 4 years Saladin returned. This time there would be no miracle. The armies of Jerusalem were crushed at Hattin. The holy city fell. The kingdom Baldwin had saved twice was gone forever. But legends are not measured in time, they are measured in memory. And Baldwin IV of Jerusalem became more than a king. He became a symbol. In every painting, every chronicle, he is the boy who felt no pain, the king who fought death and ruled until his last breath. His enemies respected him. His soldiers worshipped him. Even Saladin, upon hearing of his death, is said to have bowed his head and whispered, "There was never a braver king." The Leper King had lost his flesh, his sight and his throne, but not his dignity. He died as he lived, undefeated.